Welcome to this week's episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm. This week, we sit down with Craig Bohl, the new Executive Director of the AFCA. In this conversation, Coach Bohl walks through his career as a coach, shares his love for college football, and talks about his new role with the AFCA. But first, a word from CoachComm.
Deuce left, check with me. If they're in quarters match, we're going to Pittsburgh or Ohio.
They're in zero.
Let's go Hippo, Seattle, wide choice. If we call the protection right, it's 6.
When a play call is the difference between winning and losing, your headset choice could be your most important decision. When the call counts, CoachComm is the only choice for clear, dependable communication. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
We got it, guys. Good job.
Now, let's get inside the headset with Coach Bohl. Coach Bohl, how we doing?
You know, great. Boy, this is an exciting time. I know that you're a rock star out there, so for me to be on your show here is great.
Well, it's all my my honor here. I'm excited for this opportunity, especially as I start diving into your background. Just just an amazing story. Just kid from Nebraska, just kind of taking over the world here as a ball coach, just one day at a time. So let's dive into that story a little bit. When did you decide that you wanted to be a part of this great profession? What was that kind of defining moment that you wanted to be
it's interesting. Everybody has a different collegiate experience. Mine was somewhat injury-riddled when I was playing at Nebraska, and I never really played very much. But at that time, Mario, we had a freshman team, and I had sustained an injury that they were no longer going to allow me to play. And so I started to coach the freshman team. And so I spent 3 years at the University of Nebraska. It was kind of a transition between a part-time coach and a graduate assistant coach at that time, but really having an opportunity to be engaged. And it became apparent to me that this is not work at all.
Yeah. You were just enjoying it.
That's right. It was a passion.
That's awesome. Now just being able to kind of have that, obviously devastating, I'm sure, to have that injury and kind of end your career, but to be able to just quickly be emerged into the profession. What kind of growth was that those first couple of years like, kind of seeing it behind the scenes? It
was exponential because I saw a different side of our coaches. Coach Osborne at that time had done a great job. He engaged everybody, and the freshman team was a developmental program. And Frank Solich was our head football coach. We had a full squad of probably 100 and some players, and we played 5 games. And so as a young coach, it gave you an opportunity to really engage with players and develop them. We had some remarkable players that played during that time, and really gave me a great foundation to get launched in coaching.
Yeah, and so you do that for a few years, and then you get the graduate assistant role. Kind of, just reflecting back on that time, what was the differences between being a GA and being that student assistant, just the way that was formatted?
Well, it really wasn't that much different. What was important, though, during that time was, you started to take more intense graduate school classes. Yeah. And, of course, everybody will talk about the role back when I was a GA. I mean, we – at that time there was 16-millimeter film. Everything wasn't digital. There was a lot of card drawing and things of that nature. But I had a remarkable experience. Our coaches on our staff, beyond Coach Osborne, we had all played for. They were, iconic coaches that had stayed there forever. And so a great learning opportunity for me. But there was a lot of hard work, too. Anybody that gets in this profession, you got to, when you first get started, you're going to be wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah, it's a lot of grinding and and like you said, I mean, I know just enough about the 16-millimeter film from stories from other coaches. I never had to dabble in it, but it sounded like it was a whole deal in its own.
It was a whole deal in its own. The cut-ups were all glued together, and the coaches, you just were holding your breath that the film was not going to break. And usually it did, and they'd look at me like, okay, what's up? And I think – I spent, a lot of times in a small room with glue, so maybe part of my brain cells are somewhat warped now.
Oh, man. Well, to be just finishing up as a GA and have a lot of significant experience because you did get those opportunities, after your injury. Nebraska born and bred, you step away. You go to North Dakota State.
Right.
It's the first time having your own room. I can only imagine. I mean, you're 23, 24 at this point?
I think I was either 24. I just know, Mario, I was about 2 years older, and I coached all 4 secondary guys. And, just trying to stay ahead of them, but also to be relatable. Yeah. And really was blessed because we had a great program. NDSU had played for the national championship the year before I got there. And that year we played again for the national championship. So we had 4 really, really good players in the secondary.
Yeah, I always like to ask this question because, obviously your story's a little unique, and there's guys that probably share something similar in terms of, immediately coaching for your alma mater. But you were able to kind of get into profession because of the injury and did a good job with the freshman team, get the GA job. How did you go about at 24 years old, not having your own room ever technically, going to be a part of this program that, absolutely dominated the 80s?
Well, one of the things that really helped that maybe some young coaches don't have an opportunity now was, and I appreciate you saying not having your own room, but in fact, we did. We separated. We had position meetings. We had our own practice field. We'd have games on Friday. There'd be about 20,000 people that would show up.
Oh, my goodness.
And then at the tail end of that, I had an opportunity to be the defensive coordinator of that group. And so somewhat of a big picture perspective. And so when I went to NDSU, it wasn't like, okay, this is my first time to lead a room. And so there was some comfortability there.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. That whole narrative, not narrative, but the idea of having freshman football, there's a lot of merit to that. It was too bad that it went away because many times as freshmen, you're not quite ready for that stage. And so it gave you a chance. The NCAA said, okay, these freshmen need to have a chance to get acclimated to school, to get acclimated to the collegiate environment. And then as a young coach, it gave me an opportunity to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So that says a lot right there. I've heard a ton of stories just on this podcast over the years. I did not know that was kind of the opportunity that presented itself at that point in time. So in 1984, just, getting that job, that wasn't that big of a transition for you. But obviously the program is, this is a big time program at this point in time.
Yeah, we were running hot at that time and really was, one of the premier programs in Division II. I worked for a guy named Don Morton, and it was a great experience for me. Coach Morton was, part of the Jim Wacker tree, and we ran the split back beer, and, we were 4-2-5 on defense and had really good players. Coach Morton set up a good recruiting model. He was always a business-like man and ended up actually working for Microsoft and being in the same room with Bill Gates and some of those other people.
Oh, how about that?
It was interesting, yeah.
Well, obviously, you have a great year there, just during that time frame, and then you transition to linebackers at Tulsa. Now, you're telling me that part of it, getting all that experience on that freshman team, it helps prepare me a little bit more for this question. But you're a DB guy at that point in time, kind of through and through as a player and coach so far at that point in time. From a professional development standpoint, especially me being the education guy around here, how did you go about making sure that you were prepared from the coach linebackers?
Well, many times in our young coaches that are out there right now will find that sometimes you're coaching a position that you're not exactly have a great background. I'd spent maybe half a year working with a linebacker coach at Nebraska, and it was interesting because during that time at Tulsa, Coach Berry was actually on our staff during the course of the spring. I was going to start out to be an assistant offensive line coach. Our head coach wanted me to learn the offensive line play.
Yeah.
And then things just didn't gel with the composition of the staff. And I can remember Coach Morton knocking on the door and give me this. And I walked in, he goes, we're going to have you coach linebackers. And so pretty fast curve in a hurry. Certainly I was honest with our players. I never tried to tell them something I really didn't know about.
Yeah.
But was blessed with some really good players and had a great experience at Tulsa coaching linebackers. And then also what helped, our outside linebacker coach was Lovie Smith.
Oh, wow.
And he had been at Tulsa.
Yeah.
And so he and I were young coaches together and worked through a lot of things. So it was very helpful.
Yeah. Let me rewind real quick just to talk about, because once again, I'm thinking 84. You said you were 24 years old when you had this job.
I think 24, 25, something like that.
So we're in that time frame, and I mean, you're already an FBS coach,
right?
FBS coach, which is most guys' dream to be, be able to get rolling that quickly. How did that job come about? How'd you go about pursuing it?
The Tulsa job? Well, our head coach, Coach Morton, had some success, obviously, and at that time, he was selected to be the head coach at the University of Tulsa. And so that's how it happened.
Okay.
And so you're right. I was a young guy. It was a great opportunity. The recruiting landscape changed. I began to recruit Houston, which I didn't know anything about. It was interesting. Coach Morton made us at that time go out and wear a tie every day during spring recruiting.
Oh, wow.
Now, I want you to remember what it would be like going out into Houston in May every day with a tie. And coaches all across the area look at, what is this guy doing? And you know what? I rode for the brand. I wore that tie every day. I got to be known as the guy wearing the tie spring recruiting.
Well, I hope you had like a towel in the car to wipe the
Oh,
sweat.
I'll tell you what, it was some rough times, Mario, rough times. I had to have a lot of shirts and a lot of ties.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously a great time at Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
You really look at your career from a big picture standpoint. You spend a lot of time in this Midwest, but you have these little offshoots where you hit the South and you hit the East Coast just a little bit. But you get an opportunity to go back kind of up in that Midwest to Wisconsin once again as a linebackers coach. Once again, just a lot of transition. And I will say you're probably after 300 podcast episodes, you might be one of my only 2 or 3 guys that have had 40 plus years of experience. So I apologize. We're not diving into every stop in so much detail, but we got a lot of stops to roll through here. But yeah, so just talk to us a little bit about the transition to Wisconsin. Why was that a good opportunity for you and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, once again, Coach Morton, we had success at Tulsa, and Coach Morton, we had recruited Wisconsin when we were at NDSU, and so he was selected as a head football coach. Mario, I think we had 2 guys on our staff that were over 30 years old. And it was a really formative time for me. I can remember being a young coach going out on the field and playing Michigan, and Troy Vincent was one of our players in the secondary, and Coach Simbecker comes up to me in pregame warm-up, chomping on his gum. "You ready to go, Sonny?" And yes, sir. But really some iconic coaches in the Big Ten at that time. And,
no doubt.
And it was a pretty fast learning curve, because you were coaching. Barry Alvarez was the linebacker coach at Iowa. He worked for Hayden Fry. I was the linebacker coach at Wisconsin, and we were recruiting the same guys. And, I got schooled up quite a bit on a lot of things. And so you had to learn, but it was really a great experience, and experience in the Big Ten at that time was certainly unique.
Yeah, no question. Now, at this point in time, you're knee deep in the profession. I mean, you're a ball coach. I mean, you're getting after it. I just want to interject a little bit about your AFCA ties. At what point in time did you start kind of going to the convention?
Yeah, the very first year when I was a graduate assistant or a part-time coach at that time, Mario, the first convention was in Los Angeles. Okay. And I didn't know anything about it. Yeah. Some guys on the staff said, "You go on the convention." I didn't, I wasn't aware of it all. So Coach said, "Yeah, it'd be good for you to go." He and I stayed in the same hotel across from where I can't even remember where the convention was at, but I was awestruck. Riding up and down the elevators and seeing some, iconic coaches, during that time, whether it was George Perlis or, all the coaches, Bear Bryant, all these guys were all there. And it was a huge eye-opening experience for me. And that's the first time I got involved with the AFCA. So my membership is pretty lengthy, and that's indicated by the number of years I coached. Yeah,
no question, especially if you got going kind of immediately. It took me a little time to go, but I will say I remember my first one. It was kind of the same thing, obviously different guys that I'm in all about, but it's, it's Larry Coker. It's it's those guys walking around. And, one of the feelings I got was, man, I was our professions, we're former players, right? And, so we have a little ego and all that kind of stuff, probably a little bit, but I was intimidated. It was a lot, just a lot of people, and it just made you realize, like, man, if you want to be good in this profession, you don't have to work your tail off. Right. And did you have any of those type of feelings just kind of early on?
I certainly did. Yeah. Going there, and then you didn't know what path it was going to. I knew I was going to leave Nebraska at some time, but it really became apparent how many people really wanted to help. Yeah. And what also became really apparent was some of the offline conversations that were had. You would go to a general session, and then you'd be able to step out. Yeah. And at that time, coaching was really, really more, I don't want to say collaborative, but I can remember, Coach Osborne and Coach Switzer at Oklahoma, they probably talked 3 times a week. Coaches would share. And so as a young coach, it was really, really an impressionable time for me to glean as much methodology in coaching. And I found people being really helpful. And many of the ties that I made during those times were the same guys that I would stay in touch with 20 years later.
Right. Just some bonds that are hard to break.
Without question.
Yeah.
They're great bonds.
Yeah, no question. Now let's kind of hop back into the career. So we've pretty much, from this point on, you're coordinating or head coaching. So kind of ran through the position coach deal. Now I do want to ask you this question because you said something interesting earlier. You talked about kind of stepping into that linebacker role, and not exactly similar, but I played running back, and then one of my first few jobs was a receiver coach.
Right.
And I got out of my comfort zone and really learned the position. And now, and you asked me, I'm a receivers guy.
Right.
Like I just fell in love with the position, and almost not planned it, I think helped me be a better coach. I know you're a ball coach. You can coach probably in any position.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I'm a defensive guy. I'm dangerous on offense. I can tell you that.
Just dangerous enough. But what do you identify as? Would you say you're a linebackers guy, a DBs guy? If you had to,
no, I'm a linebacker guy. I spent all those years,
right.
A lot of dirt under my fingernails coaching backers, and certainly continued to sharpen my sword. Yeah. Had a chance to collaborative work with different people. Fred Goldsmith was a guy when I was at Tulsa. When I went to Wisconsin, Coach Goldsmith was the defensive coordinator at Arkansas for Kenny Hatfield in the Southwest Conference. And so I would go down and spend time with Coach Goldsmith. He was a great fundamentalist. He was a defensive coordinator and a great, great linebacker coach.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome to kind of remember some of those guys that,
oh, yeah.
that helped sharpen your tools as you were early on in that deal. Now, 1989, you get your first defensive coordinator opportunity there at Rice. Now, once again, I didn't realize that. So you have coordinated before, technically back in
but
yeah, this is a different deal now.
It was a way different deal. At that time we were in the Southwest Conference, right. Mario. It was a challenging job. They hadn't experienced a lot of history. Yeah. Coach Goldsmith became the head coach, and I was the defensive coordinator. So I replaced him. And, he pushed me to be better. Right. I can remember walking off the practice field about every day, and there would be a notepad filled with red ink about things that I could do better. Right. And, we had, I think, good players, but we had to make them great. Some of the teams that we played, as you know, down here in Texas, at that time, the composition of the league was, of course, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Baylor, Houston, TCU, Texas Tech. That was some really, really good teams. And so we ended up having some winning years. It was five years there. And that was probably my most growth as far as a linebacker and a coordinator. Coach Goldsmith really done a great job fashioning that program.
Yeah. Now, if you can kind of reflect on that time period, what was the biggest difference you would say between just personally with your own self from year 1 to year 2 as a D coordinator?
Well, the first year being the coordinator there, I didn't even know what I didn't know. Yeah. I mean, we were out there, and I was the youngest guy on the staff by far, putting together some really other outstanding defensive coaches and leading that staff, and then relying on Coach Goldsmith. The second year, I became more comfortable. Certainly was a challenging job, but I just became more comfortable in my own skin. But each year there was exponential growth, and then you'll look on that time, I ended up going to Duke with Coach Goldsmith, and one day he was sitting, and he would always watch tape with me and was always striving for perfection. We played Baylor and won 6-3 over in Waco, and he was upset because we didn't do some defensive call right. Otherwise, we could have had a shutout. It was a masterpiece. We gave up 3 points. Yeah. But at Duke, he looked over at me and goes, "Well, you finally ran me out of a job. You know more about this than I do." And so I guess it was probably the ultimate compliment.
Yeah, that's got to be somebody, and much thanks to him. But at the same time,
he grounded us to make us better. Yeah. I mean, it was he was a taskmaster. There was times that you were sleeping in the office. I became addicted to coffee. Not a lot of sleep, but probably a really formative growth period as far as fundamentals on defensive football.
And that time period was pretty special there at Duke. In 94. Anyways, you guys had a heck of a year.
We certainly did. We were picked 9th in the ACC, and at that time, my mother said, "Well, that doesn't sound so bad. We're looking forward to going to the bowl game. I said, Mom, there's 9 teams. Well, what happened was, and we had a remarkable coaching staff, and we did some unconventional things and got outside maybe our comfort zone, got on a roll. Actually, we were playing for the Sugar Bowl at the tail end of the year. We lost a really well-coached Mac Brown team at North Carolina. Ended up playing Wisconsin in a bowl game down in Tampa, and it was 1 year, but it was one of those special years that all the stars seemed to align right.
Yeah. Now, I do want to ask you this question here because, I kind of made mention of, as we talk about Wyoming here in a second, but Wyoming, North Dakota State, Nebraska, not all totally different, as I know you can tell better than anybody, but, kind of localities pretty similar, all that kind of stuff. So it's, probably a lot more similarities than there are differences. But you have another string that I'm just now piecing together as I'm looking at this deal. Tulsa's a private school.
Right.
Rice is a private school. Duke is a private school. All these schools are hard to consistently be good at in football. What were some of the similarities and differences or uniquenesses, if any, that you noticed? Well,
there certainly was. I mean, you had admission requirements. One of the first things you would do is supposed to go see the coach, you go to the counselor's office. But then you also recognize to leverage the strengths intellectually of those players. Then also to leverage the fact that you're operating in a private school and, some of the opportunities that your players were going to be able to have. It was, we would talk some of the, at that time, a lot of players went home in the summer. Yeah. And some of the opportunities they had, they were working for the CIA or they were working for Wall Street or something like that. But nonetheless, football was important to them. Yeah. To leverage the fact you were at a large school like Wisconsin and comparing that to a school like Rice, or Tulsa, I think we had like 2,700 students. So big time football, but sometimes not large student bodies.
That's right. Now, I do want to ask this just from a coordinating standpoint. You mentioned kind of that first year at Rice, and then him unleashing you that first year at Duke, and just kind of getting after it, and you showing him that he should have the confidence in you. What was the biggest difference or a piece of advice that first year Duke coach would give that first year Rice coach?
You know what? I think Coach Goldsmith really did a great job of painting a picture and then understanding where we were at. One of the things that I saw him transition when we were at Duke was he really began to roll into this head coaching perspective. Okay. We had a really experienced offensive coordinator, and I was an experienced defensive coordinator, and we knew our roles. Right. And he was so good then at being in tune with our other players. And here's a case of unleashing a defense. We were playing Clemson. We were undefeated at the time, I believe, and in a barn burner at home, and having a hard time stopping them. And, I called a safety blitz at a really critical time with probably less than a minute left to go, and Coach Goldsmith's on the phone saying, "Is this sound versus the option?" Silence. "Is this sound versus the option?" And I said, "No." And he squatted down and covered his eyes, Mario. Oh, no. And I'll still remember a player named Zayd Aleem coming through the A gap and making the big sack. And Fred was like, "This is unbelievable." So sometimes you got to go to the horse races, too, and know when to dabble in some risky stuff.
There you go. What they say, it's sometimes better to be lucky than be good, right?
Without question. And that day we were lucky when we beat Clemson.
That's awesome, Coach. Yeah, so I appreciate you kind of giving that insight. So I would imagine it's got to be a special opportunity that kind of rises in 95, especially the time frame, being a Nebraska guy, that's your alma mater, all that good stuff. You get the opportunity to kind of go back and be a full-time position coach. It's going to transition to something here in a little bit we'll talk about. Just talk a little bit about that phone call and how you got back to. Yeah,
it was interesting. Kevin Steele, who's a friend of mine, was leaving to go coach the Carolina Panthers, and here I was a coordinator in the ACC, and we had a successful season. Charlie McBride was a coordinator of the Black Shirts, and I'd reached out to one of the other coaches, and then I called Coach Osborne up, and he was receptive, and came back, and it was kind of like old home week. I mean, you walked into a room, Mario. What was so spectacular was there were older coaches on our staff. Charlie McBride, Milt Tenneper, iconic guys. And then there were younger coaches like Turner Gill and myself who played for these coaches, and we all meshed together. You're right. They had won the national championship the year before, beaten Miami, an opportunity for me to coach the linebackers and then mesh into a room with, like I said, Coach Darlington and Coach McBride and all these other guys. And then also seeing a whole new side of Coach Osborne. He was unbelievable at communicating with players. And it was great to have a chance to be part of that staff.
Oh, well, let me ask this question. This might not be a question for you to be able to answer, but this is a decade later from probably your last time, right? Because you were there you left there in '84, so a decade has passed, and you made mention of like his demeanor changing a little bit. Was that a sign of just the times and him acclimating, or was he just comfortable? Just a lot more comfortable there?
Maybe some of it was, I was in a different role.
Yeah.
I saw him in staff meetings be but lighthearted. I saw how he really began engaging with players, understanding, and maybe when I was there before, maybe I didn't appreciate that, or he did grow.
Mm-hmm.
But I also saw his unbelievable ability to be a masterful guy as far as crafting a staff. Everybody had different personalities. We had defined roles, but there were a lot of undefined roles. I once said if a Harvard MBA student came in, he'd probably call it organized chaos. Somehow it just all meshed together.
Yeah.
We had phenomenal players. They were engaged. They cared deeply about the program. They were not all heavily recruited players. The composition of the 95 team, which by and large has been rated the second best football team in college football history, was composed of recruiting classes that were rated 30th and 31st. We had great players, but they did not have a silver spoon in their mouth, and so a phenomenal experience for me.
And now, a quick word from Hader Athletic. Since 1954, Hader Athletic has been your trusted partner in football practice equipment. Handmade in the USA with care and dedication, our products are crafted to elevate your team's performance. But what truly sets us apart? It's our unwavering commitment to customer service. When you reach out, you'll be speaking to a real person with extensive product knowledge that prioritizes you getting your equipment fast. Experience the Hader difference today. Visit HaderAthletic.com and join the community of coaches who trust us for quality, reliability, and expertise. Hader Athletic. For coaches, by coaches. Save 15% on your next order by using promo code AFCA 2024 at checkout. Now, let's get back to the episode.
And I mentioned this to you before off air. I remember growing up in the 90s as a teenager.
Right.
That's where I wanted to go. That's where, I mean, I had kids at the school. We had Nebraska hats. That was the place to be. So when you start talking about this, I kind of get icked out by the word because it gets thrown around a little too loosely, in my opinion. But the word culture, I mean, in the 90s, I mean, that was the definition of culture.
Right.
I mean, you had the black shirts, you had these blue collar guys.
Right.
What was that culture like?
It was an unbelievable player led, and that's you heard that a lot. But the players, when I went back, Mario, most of the time, there was never a coach that was challenging a player to have better effort in practice. Those players had this expectation each day that they were going to go out and practice hard. And if some guy was off a little bit, a coach never raised his voice. It was those players raising their voice, encouraging and demanding.
Yeah.
And, a physical nature. Coach Osborne had a great, great vision of how to win during that time. And like I said, we had phenomenal players. And many times people ask me, well, what was the best football you ever watched? Mm-hmm. It's interesting. We were number one in the country, undefeated. We had a bye week getting ready to play Oklahoma. It was Friday. Coach Osborne comes in that day and said, we're going to scrimmage. I'm looking back, scrimmage? This is at the tail end of the year, Mario. Yeah. We're number one in the country.
Right.
This is Friday, live. And the best football I ever saw was Nebraska against Nebraska, Memorial Stadium with the gates locked. The number one offense in the country going against the number one defense in the country. And it was on. I mean, on. And at the end, there was a huge fight. And Coach Osborne comes over blowing his whistle, and his harshest words were, "Dadgummit." You knew when he said dadgummit, it was really, "Dadgummit, Craigo, what's going on?" I said, "Coach, you got all these stallion racehorses. You're putting them out there. You're going to have some sparks." But it was remarkable for me. And also just Coach, that was Coach's perspective. Hey, this is football. We got to go play physical.
Yeah. And not a fan in sight.
Not a fan in sight. When people say it was, I mean, the iconic players that we had almost everybody on both sides of the field played in the NFL a long time. A lot of all-pro players. So a great experience.
Yeah, no doubt. And obviously, with Nebraska now, and we're trying to get back to that time. I mean, all programs trying to get back to those high times. But that black shirt, that was such a iconic deal. I just remember all the high schools kind of had their variations of it that they kind of pulled from you guys at that time. What, for anybody that's not familiar with that, like what is the black shirts? What is that about?
It was a badge.
Yeah.
And when a guy was presented a black shirt, it was like, you have been anointed. Yeah. This proud tradition. And there was a mark. And there would be times if a guy wasn't up to standards, a black shirt would be taken away. He would go in, and I mean, he would have tears. And he would also have tears of what it was like. And one of the things that we were able to do, we sent TV crews out to former players who wore black shirts.
Yeah.
And we took a video. And I told them all, I said, no one will ever see this except our own players. I mean, NBC Sports, everybody's trying to get that video. And those guys poured their hearts out of what it meant to be a black shirt. Yeah. And a really, really special time. I mean, there were some bad dudes that were great players.
That's right. And so for you get a special opportunity, kind of run that black shirt defense there in Nebraska. After I think 4 or 5 years as a position coach, 5 years as a position coach. Number one, just feelings. Like what was that like? I mean, that had to be so special.
Well, it was really special because this was a place that I had always strived to. There was a team at Nebraska. There was a black shirts and there was a gold shirts. There was a green shirts, and then there was no shirt. And I was a green shirt, and you always looked up to those black shirts. Yeah. And then now to be kind of leading that group with the other defensive coaches was really special. There were some great times, but now all of a sudden you're calling that defense. And I can remember playing Notre Dame, and we're on the 1 yard, they're on the 3 yard line in overtime, and it's 1st and 3. Boy, I'll tell you what, you talk about a pressure cooker, and you're the guy making the call.
That's right.
And so grew a lot, challenged a lot. We played for the national championship against a great Miami team, took to the woodshed, soul searching, all those things. I think it had a big impact on that next path to become a head coach.
That was what I was going to kind of lead you into, but you answered it. So we'll focus a little bit more on the head coaching part, but I was actually glad just on that. That had to be such a, I don't know, kind of iconic piece of your career as you kind of head down this journey of being a head ball coach. And so that's what's next for you. In 2003, you returned back to North Dakota State, around 15 years later, and this time as the head coach. What's really interesting, and I kind of want to say this here a little bit, but I mean, in the 80s, I think they won 4 national championships. Is that something like that?
Yeah,
North Dakota State,
right.
And in the 90s, almost into the mid 2000s, it was kind of just a pretty big lull.
Right.
Not that they were bad, but it just wasn't much happening at that point in time. So I'm assuming this is kind of a rebuild job to a certain extent.
Well, a rebuild job, but the culture was not a complete rebuild, Mario. Those were some of the hardest working guys I'd ever been around. I said, okay, we just got to be smart with what we ask them to do. North Dakota State had a proud history of a room called the championship room. Okay. And the only players that could go into that room, you had to have won a conference championship. Wow. And the room was over now in the quote Fargo Dome, and it was no one could go in.
Empty. Yeah,
it was empty. It was you couldn't go in there.
Right.
And so I think more than anything else was coaching from the shoulders up. Guys had a great work habit. It was fashioning some things with what we were doing to have them believe that they could win.
Yeah. Well, once again, let me rewind here a little bit to talk about getting the job. Mm-hmm. How did you know you were ready to run a program?
Well, Gene Taylor, who's now at Kansas State, I spent probably about several days just processing, and then I gleaned tons of things that I had learned from Coach Osborne, working for him, and then Frank Solich, and then Coach Goldsmith, and then Coach Morton. And so all those coaches had an impact on, okay, if I'm ever in this position to be a head coach, we will impart this and we will impart this. We may not do this. We're going to put this together. And so I painted a picture for Gene Taylor, and he had a tough choice. Gus Bradley, who is now a coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts and had been a head coach in the NFL, was a remarkable person. And he was an internal candidate. And so it really came down to Coach Bradley and myself. And, NDSU was transitioning. They were transitioning from Division II up. And Gene Taylor felt like we needed a fresh look. And so I felt ready. I felt actually more ready to do that than when I first became a coordinator.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always find interesting is you said something that it's I think all good head coaches probably do this along their journeys when they have as many stops as you were fortunate to have at this point in time. And taking these notes of these head coaches saying, I like that.
Yep.
That not so much. But, you're always kind of putting this, little program guide together. The harder part, in my opinion, and I've never head coached, so it doesn't mean much, but is like you get that job, and how do you comprise a staff? How do you know who to retain? How do you know who to bring over?
That's a real, and I think that's probably the most artful thing that a head coach has to do, because the assistant coaches really drive the train.
No question.
And I think as soon as a head coach recognizes that, and then the composition of the staff, and can you trust them?
Yeah.
Will they understand the framework in which you want to empower them?
Right.
And that was a challenge. The first staff that we had when I was at NDSU, Gus Bradley was the internal candidate, was the defensive coordinator, and I had brought Jimmy Burrow, who's Joe Burrow's father, with me from Nebraska up there to run the defense, and we imparted on putting Monty Kiffin's scheme in. And so to recruit Gus to say, okay, you're no longer the head coach, you're no longer the defensive coordinator, Gus was all in. And so that staff was really remarkable. Some of the guys that are still coaching, either in the NFL or college, Danny Enos was our first coordinator on offense. Van Malone, who's at Kansas State, was our wide receiver coach. Todd Wush was our defensive line coach during that time. Jeff McInerney, another guy out there, probably some people know. But it was really a remarkable group. Yeah. And I may be leaving a guy out here or there, but it was a transition for me, though, to back off and take an overarching view. And that is difficult to do, that transition.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if there's much of a follow-up to what I'm about to say here, but I just thought it was interesting that, I've talked to you twice on your time in Nebraska as a full-time coach, and you may mention how that staff was compromised, how artful it was in 2005. And I mean, were you thinking about that?
Yes. Coach always talked about that everybody on this staff has a different role, and some coaches have a strength that is required, and sometimes those are painted out in a role, and then there's other informal roles that go into that. Yeah. And so I was really mindful of how Coach Osborne, we had lots of different characters on our coaching staff. Not everybody marched to the same tune on everything. Guys were able to express their opinions, and so these staffs that were developed, whether at NDSU and Wyoming, I was very, very mindful that composition is really important.
Now that you're out of that frame of having to hire a coach, was there anything? And there might never be an answer here, so but I do want to shoot my shot here.
Okay.
Was there anything special that you felt like you did on the interview process? A coach you don't know from Adam.
You bet.
Was there something special you did to get
you know what?
Here's
what I would say is, if you can't paint your vision down on the back of an envelope and write it out, then you're probably not ready. You need to feel it inside. You need to be able to have this vision on where the program can go, and it needs to be heartfelt. And so now, certainly, when I went through this interview process, I had bullet points and things along those lines, but there was a real passion that I had. Yeah. There was a real familiarity that I had on, okay, where had NDSU been? They'd kind of gone off, maybe in the abyss here a little bit. How could we return it back? Yeah. And turn it back to national prominence? And that vision had to be really clear to be able to connect with the AD to say, he's giving me some information that is just not your standard, okay, what's your philosophy on discipline and things like this. And some of the insight that, that Coach Osborne had shown me on the power of love and empowering other people, I think that really separated me from the other candidates.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, Coach. Well, clearly it was something. I'm going to highlight a few things here. Please, I hope I don't skimp you off any of your wins, because I did not write this note down, but I'm pretty sure it was 104 and 32 during your time frame there at North Dakota State. 4 conference titles, 3 straight FCS national titles, 11, 12, and 13. Yeah, I did write it down. 104.
Yeah, you did. Yeah,
good. AFCA, FCS Coach of the Year, 12 and 13. I mean, just absolutely rocked it. And then you go back all the way to your playing career. You've been around a lot of successful programs. You've seen from Duke, from Nebraska. I mean, you just seen a lot of success. What are some of those common characteristics of some of those teams that you were on? All very different.
Yeah. They were different. One of the things that did help, though, Mario, if you take the time from being in Nebraska, at North Dakota State into Wyoming, I think there was some true principles that we held to. One, football is a physical game. I always say it's a man's game played by men. It'll bury your soul naked. And so you had to practice that way within reason. The other thing that really became important was discipline, that you had to do all the little things right that added up to some really, really impactful performances. And then just a framework of how you recruited, to how you positioned your players, to what you did during the course of the year to develop that was really important. So a big impact on how we practice at Nebraska, how we practiced at NDSU, developing depth. All those things had a big impact, and tweaking it each year, but really not getting off the critical path.
I'm going to ask you a tough question here. This is a question for all the coaches out there.
Okay.
Because I've heard it before, and I've actually had to question myself, not having that experience in the Midwest, during my coaching career, is what recruiting.
Yeah.
How did you manage to have this certain type of guy that I felt like whenever I watch North Dakota State play, is a certain type of guy that can play some ball, but they're physical, they're hard work.
Right.
What was your philosophy from a recruiting standpoint?
Well, I think the biggest thing I can remember talking to Coach Osborne at the tail end of his career and asking him about recruiting is, Craig, I found the guys I used to maybe beg and try to convince to come to Nebraska, they never end up playing. The ones that end up playing were the ones that really wanted to be there.
Yeah.
And not getting caught up with who else is recruiting who, but what we were seeing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I changed was I took an active role about every Friday night. I was on a sideline of a high school game. I purposely did that at the start, so our players got used to our coordinators running what was going on Friday evening, and I was out. And as a matter of fact, when I was at NDSU, I bought my own airplane and I became a pilot. And as opposed to, I would leave, we'd have a meeting and I'd hop in my plane and I'd fly to someplace up by Canada or over to Green Bay or someplace like that. And I saw how players would respond during some adversity. I saw eye level where they were at, and then would they mesh in? We needed to develop what we called a profile of what characteristics were going to stick in Fargo. I'm going to tell you, it's a unique place, a great place, but you go out there, we would practice sometimes, and it might be 10 degrees in snow. Yeah. And so you better have a player that's going to embrace that.
Yeah. Obviously, we're on a very serious topic anytime we're talking about the profession, but I just got to make sure I follow up here. So you flew.
I flew.
You flew the plane.
I flew the plane.
And landed it. And
I flew the plane and landed it. Sometimes probably shouldn't have been flying.
That's insane.
Yeah. Well, we did not have, we were in a sparsely populated area.
Right.
We didn't have a budget enough to be able to go out and charter.
Yeah.
We wanted to see these guys. And so, I learned how to fly. Coach Osborne had his pilot's license. I always wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But he never used it recruiting. So I would get up there, 6430 uniform, taxiing to runway 18, and I would take off and I would fly. But some of the airstrips I landed, there weren't a lot of people around.
Well, the commitment starts at the top. You were committed to go see those guys. So that's awesome, man.
Yep.
That 300 episodes in, that might be the first. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. But getting back to it. So 13 comes around, and this is very, very interesting. You have all this success at North Dakota State. Everything would say just, hey, let's keep running this thing back. And then you go to take this Wyoming opportunity that's, at this point in time, it's not in a great place. I mean, it's a good program. I mean, there's some stuff for you, but you take the job. What was kind of the thought process behind Wyoming?
You bet. You know what really helped me? I can remember talking to Coach Tressel at Ohio State, and I was in his office. I said, certainly when you were at Youngstown State, you had an opportunity to go. And he goes, yeah, I did one time. I thought about going to the University of Maryland, but he goes, you know what? I'm an Ohio guy. He said, Craig, you got to be the right fit. And so during this time when we had this success, first of all, it became apparent that that program had gone as far as what it could go under my leadership. And it was time for some new set of eyes. And Coach Kleiman came in, was on our staff, and done a remarkable job. But I said, okay, there would be overtures from different parts of the country, and it wasn't going to fit. Right. Maybe they looked at me, but I wasn't going to change, and there had to be a message that would resonate. And Wyoming had always been a special place for me. They had recruited me when I was a younger player. I appreciated the spirit of the West. You're right. They had kind of fallen on hard times. A lot of coaches. At one time, that was a launching pad. You went there. Yeah. Pat, I mean, all kinds of coaches. Fred Akers, Pat Dye, they all were there 1 year, and then they leave. Yeah. They started to attract people that did that but were not invested. And I knew this was going to be my last stop, so I went there. I knew that it was important to them. They had a great deal of pride. I felt like I've always believed this, Mario. Any great football program needs to have a style of play and who they are that is indicative of the fabric of the people in the state that it represents. Wyoming, ranch country, ag country, hard working people. They don't want flash. They want to say, okay, who's our coach? Does he do what he says he's going to do? We don't need all the pomp and circumstance. Just play cowboy tough football. Yeah. And I knew that that's what they wanted to do, and that was our style. Yeah. I also knew that they had lost their direction, and so pretty major rework. Unlike when I went to NDSU, there was a really good culture that was there. It needed to be tweaked a little bit. This was a whole major. They had been a passing team. We had 15 different uniforms. I was like, this is a bunch of baloney. Wyoming, our colors are brown and gold. We're only going to have 2 sets of uniforms. We're going to play hard-nosed, cowboy tough football. That's like turning an aircraft carrier around. And so very rewarding, but very challenging.
That's interesting. You said you reach out to Tressel, and that kind of stuck out to me there. And you talked about fit, and I can only imagine during this run, you had to get some phone calls and things like that.
Yeah, there were. Yeah,
and that's interesting. Like, because in this business so much, especially early in your career, you're just trying to get the next job. It's about who can call me so they can give me that opportunity. Now you're in this position where you're able to say, man, I'm not going to just go hop for the more money or a bigger letter sweater. It's got to be a fit.
It's got to be a fit. Yeah. There needs to be a commitment. There was a commitment by the school. Yeah. There was a commitment by myself that this was going to be my last job. Right. We're going to roll up our sleeves. It's going to take a major rework. But Coach Tressel had he talked about one time, Mario, he said, I went to Florida State and Coach Bowden was coaching down there, and there was an equipment guy there. He said, well, I got to believe Coach Bowden's the best coach he ever had. Guy looked over at Coach Tressel and goes, no, I reckon he's probably the 3rd best coach. Coach Tressel was like, what do you mean? He goes, no, Coach Bowden understands us. He talks like us. He understands the lay of the land. Yeah. That had an impact on Coach Tressel. It had a major impact on me, that there were only going to be certain schools that were going to fit to where I wasn't going to try to be somebody I wasn't. And Wyoming seemed like a great place.
Yeah, and so you may mention kind of you're walking into a slightly different situation than you walked to North Dakota State. Like when especially honestly not having this experience yet at that point in time where you're walking into a job where you have to do that. What do you do day one? Like what's on?
Oh man, get an assessment of where you're at.
Yeah.
At that time, I appreciated some of our players on our team. There were some great guys that were there that were invested, not a ton of them, and then trying to sort out who the people were, who the pretenders were.
Yeah.
And which guys were really going to be committed. And, sometimes you give players the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes when the pressure came out west, we say spit the bit out. They would spit the bit out. And then you found out which other ones were really there to be all in no matter what.
Yeah. Well, a fantastic run from 13 up until this past December. Most bowl appearances in school history, bowl wins in school history, second most wins in school history, most NFL players in school history, highest draft pick ever, and a fantastic player in Josh Allen. You certainly left your mark, and we caught wind that you would be our next executive director here, and so I definitely tuned into that last game. What a special send off, to kind of go out with a bang there. Looking back on your career, from start to finish, man, just very rare I get the opportunity to talk to somebody that's just been in it for this long and had the success, and multiple time national championship, all this kind of stuff. This might be a hard question to ask, but what was just your takeaway from the profession, from this great game?
You know what, Mario, I can tell you I haven't gone to work a day of my life yet. Now, our college football game is in, a state of flux. There's always going to be change, but I think we probably need more leadership right now than we ever have. I recognize that sometimes coaches stay too long, and I felt like what was going to be required to keep on moving Wyoming football forward, I didn't think I was going to have the ability to do. It was going to take a new, fresh set of eyes. But I also looked at saying, what can I do to maybe have an impact? Yeah. This organization has always been near and dear to my heart. I was fortunate enough to be on the board of trustees for 12 years, and I served as our president. And, in fact, when Coach Berry was incapacitated with COVID, I served during that time as the executive director. Right. So we're in choppy water, though, when I say that is where we're at in the collegiate environment. Yeah. And we have a great game. We can't compromise that. And so, I looked back and said, okay, the sky's not falling. College football's never been more popular than it's been. Players are engaged. But also it was probably time for me to transition into something else.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's interesting as a ball coach that walked into Wyoming, and it's kind of this, this deal you got to go deal with and get right. And you're kind of walking into, this executive director role with a lot of these things kind of happening.
Right.
So, what attracted you to the challenge to come and do this?
Well, I feel like, first of all, Coach Berry, and I had a chance to be on the board of trustees with Coach Taft, right. And so both of those men, and then some of the coaches who served on our board of trustees, also recognize that there is challenges out there, that we need direction, that we need a clear vision. Coaches, I know sometimes are painted, I think, in an inaccurate light, that okay, we're just trying to make the most money we can, and these players are just basically at our service, and that's not the case. Coaches really care about the development of players, and so we can't lose that. And what I do feel like is a challenge is to be able to articulate that to the stakeholders around the country, that the coaches, we may not have all the answers, but there's a lot of wisdom and experience and insight that we have that we need to coalesce and share.
Yeah. Well, I obviously we got to the point of I say we, but making a hire for executive director. But well prior to this, you're heavily involved in the AFCA. What made you interested in being a part of the board?
Sure. First of all, I was the very first thing I was engaged with. I was asked to be on at conventions, we would gather up our coaches and have impacts on rules. And so I saw the dialogue that went on there. And then Coach Taft had called up, and I was a representative of FCS football. And to walk into a room with the other board of trustees members, sometimes you would have a perspective, and another coach in the room would classic case is David Shaw and I, when David was at Stanford and I was either at North Dakota State or Wyoming, he was an offensive guy. I'd have a hard and fast thought on this, and then I would listen to Coach Shaw, and I go, I didn't think about that. And then see the benefit of the men that are in that room and the impact that they can have. I saw the power with that. And then it really became important to me to have an opportunity to give back in a special way.
Coach, I wish we could do this again, man, because this was fun and we only grazed a lot of stuff. But before I do let you go, Coach, I want to ask, why is it important, especially, probably more talking to our young coaches and, people that are coming up in the profession with a lot more just other stuff that they can get into. Why would it be important to be involved with the AFCA as a?
You know what, I think our value system, our education, our fraternity that we have really leaves an indelible impression on young coaches. When you're a young coach, you're kind of like a baby colt that's out there, and the people that are going to influence you are either going to be real positive or sometimes negative. I think the AFCA stands for what's right in college football, and to be involved, you're going to get some great messages that are going to establish a great value system in you that you'll never waver from.
Coach, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you.
You bet.
A lot more over the years, and we appreciate you. And I know at some point in time we'll probably get you back on here, but super excited about everything that you're bringing to the AFCA.
Glad to have you on, and you're a rock star, Mario.
All right, thanks, Coach.
You bet.
CoachComm has been delivering tough headsets for tough teams for more than 31 years. It's why 97% of FBS teams and thousands of high schools across the country rely on CoachComm. Get the best for your team. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. If you'd like to learn more about this week's episode, head over to AFCA.com. There, you can access every episode and find corresponding show notes. Remember, you can catch every episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm on wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. While you're there, we'd love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback helps us improve and grow. Keep up with the latest news by following us on social media. Connect with us at Inside the Headset, and remember to tag us when you share your favorite episodes. For more updates on all things AFCA, be sure to follow the @WeAreAFCA social media accounts. If you're not a part of the AFCA community yet, visit AFCA.com to join thousands of NFL, college, and high school coaches nationwide and across the globe. Elevate your coaching game with an AFCA membership. You'll gain exclusive access to the annual AFCA convention, magazine, digital library, and AFCA Insider email. Stay up to date with the latest stories and news on the AFCA website. More than just a convention, the AFCA offers continuous education, guidance, networking, and more. Celebrate the past and shape the future with the AFCA. It's about fostering exceptional coaches who create outstanding teams and even better individuals. Invest in your skills and make a lasting impact today by engaging with the AFCA. Your journey starts here.